Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razam Pereira. Well, the Union Cabinet has cleared the Citizenship Amendment Bill of 2019 that seeks to grant citizenship to non-Muslim refugees from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan if they face religious persecution there. The bill seeks to amend the Citizenship Act of 1955 in order to grant Indian nationality to Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis and Christians who come to India after facing religious persecution in Bangladesh, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Over the past few weeks, the Home Ministry has held marathon talks with leaders and stakeholders. A large section of people, however, and organizations in the Northeast have opposed the bill. Congress, Trinamool Congress, Communist Party of India and a few other political parties have been steadfastly opposing the bill, claiming that citizenship can't be given on the basis of religion. The bill to amend the Citizenship Act of 1955 is likely to be introduced in Parliament in this session. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Citizenship Amendment Bill. Joining me on the program today are Gautam Sen, former advisor, Government of Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh, J. Deepak, advocate of the Supreme Court, and Sandeep Phukan, deputy editor of The Hindu. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Sandeep Phukan, let me start the program with you. So let's first try and analyze and understand what the Citizenship Amendment Bill is and why is there a need to change the Citizenship Act of 1955.
Well, this is part of a political promise that the BJP had made before the 2014 elections actually, that they would give citizenship rights to all those minority communities of these three countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, where they were persecuted on religious grounds, and that is why they fled and settled in India. Essentially, these are stateless people. We don't have a law for refugee. So how do you categorize them? They are non-citizens, yet they are living here for generations. So on that count, they would extend. In fact, if you recall, in the run-up to the 2014 elections, Frank, giving citizenship rights for Pakistani Hindus settled in Punjab, though their numbers may be very little, settled in states like Punjab, Gujarat, Rajasthan had come up, quite often during the campaigning stage. The other part of it is in the Northeast, people who had come from erstwhile East Pakistan, then Bangladesh and Bengali Hindus who faced religious persecution even after the creation of Bangladesh post 1971. These people, they are either on long-term visas or they have just come and settled, but they are stateless entities. So how do you recognize them? So that was the idea, but I'm not sure. Because it makes a distinction on the basis of religion. I think that is where the problematic part is. Okay. Because our law and the constitution doesn't talk about granting citizenship on the basis of religion.
Sure, okay. Sai, let me bring you to the picture. Now, this argument always comes up really when we talk about CAB, about whether it infringes on Article 14 or not. Your thoughts?
So, media reports constantly portray this particular bill as a bill that is meant to give citizenship to non-Muslims. I think that is a very unfair characterization, and I'm not trying to hold brief for any dispensation here. This is my view as someone who has been following this particular issue for quite some time now, and I've written on this particular issue as well. The definition that is being applied here, or the yardstick, is who or which community constitutes a minority in the neighboring countries. And the three countries that have been chosen for the purposes of this particular exercise are Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. So if you go by the definition of who constitutes a minority, there is a reason that you have to necessarily come to the conclusion that it would be the non-Muslims. So it's not as if they have chosen the other way.
What about the Muslim minorities, say for instance the Ahmadis in Pakistan?
Fantastic. So that is a question. So this necessarily has to be answered with some history in context. So as Mr. Phukan rightly points out, we do not have a refugee law. What we follow is a standard operating procedure of 2014, which is primarily based on a clearance given from security agencies on the basis of one, whether or not that particular group is persecuted in the country. Then you apply the principle of non-refoulement. Then you apply, as part of the principle of non-refoulement, the test of whether they pose a threat to India's security. Once these three questions are answered in the positive and in the affirmative, you end up giving a clearance to them. That is at least with respect to the status as a refugee in the first place. And then comes the next question. Now, if you want to open up this particular thing, then perhaps we have to go back to a discussion on the two-nation theory. And that is something that is inevitable, inescapable. If you look at all the reports, ever since Lieutenant General S.K. Sinha's report or even before that, and something that even the Supreme Court has taken cognizance of in the Sarvanand Sonowal line of decisions, there is a clear threat perception on the basis of what is perceived as an unfinished agenda, which many bureaucrats, top politicians have repeatedly mentioned as part of their speeches and as part of their writings from Bangladesh and other parts, let's say, and neighboring countries, so-called friendly countries. Okay. Therefore, the government of India is within its right to apply its discretion in terms of which communities, and I dare say, which communities can enter this particular country or not. Today, Ahmadiyas face persecution because of the sectarian violence in Pakistan reaching its peak. However, it remains a fact that when the vote for Pakistan was going on and when the idea of Pakistan was mooted in the 1940s, the Ahmadiyas voted en masse for being a part of an Islamic republic. That was their position. Okay. Therefore, if we want to say that because today they face persecution, we need to open our hearts and gates and doors, I think we need to be a bit more careful.
Okay.
Because already the Northeast and states like Assam are facing the brunt of it. Tripura is never mentioned when it comes to this. They have faced the brunt of it. West Bengal has faced it for such a long time. Okay. Therefore, I think the Citizenship Amendment Bill must be looked at in the context of a continuum of the existence of a two-nation theory which continues to be alive and kicking in other parts of the world. Okay. Whether we believe it or not is a different question altogether.
Sure. Okay. So the Ahmadiyas had their choice, they made their choice. Yes, now it is up to them really. It's for the others. We need to protect the others is what you're suggesting. All right. Mr. Sen, let me bring you to the picture now. So what are the political aspects of the bill and why are so many states, especially the entire Northeast, opposing this?
Actually, I would look at it from this angle. You see, was it necessary at this juncture to bring in this CAB? Whether, I mean, it is to be seen again, I'll put it that way, that, the NRC and this have to be seen in as part of a continuum. Whether the NRC experiment has failed, so this is required. I look at it from that angle. The second point is, there are minorities who have been covered within the ambit of the bill, but then, these Jews, of course, this is a very small community. There have been cases of few Jews coming back from Israel to Mizoram. Now, they are not covered within the scope of this bill because, Islam, only the Sikhs communities who have been listed out. So, a little bit of a problem is there. Secondly, now this has had repercussion because to assuage the fears of the northeastern communities, governments, etc., civil society, now the inner line permit is to be relooked into. The government, I think, has given an assurance that it will be extended. Meghalaya has already extended. Earlier, Arunachal, Assam and Manipur had that. So now, whether that is going to be conducive for the political and socio-economic development of the region, we should go into those aspects and attributes also.
Okay. So, taking off from where Mr. Sen left, Sandeep Phukan, so are the fears of the demographic change in the Northeast, especially the states there, as a result of this particular bill, are those fears justified?
Well, I'll actually answer the first part, what you asked Mr. Sen about the politics. He also hinted at the timing, questioning the timing. Yes, the two are actually related. The NRC, they may, at one level, they are completely different, separate exercises, but at another level, they are related. Because NRC is a process of excluding people who are, who have come in and who could not prove their citizenship on the basis of documents, on the basis of their legacy data. Now, many of them who cannot prove their citizenship on the basis of legacy data, but if they have, let's say, if they have come from Bangladesh and if they have settled, if I am not mistaken, the cutoff date is 31st December 2014. So if you have settled in any part of the country before that date, then you could apply for citizenship. And if you are a minority community in that country, suppose a Bangladeshi Hindu, who had, say, fled Bangladesh and could not prove that he had fled before the creation of Bangladesh. The cutoff date for NRC was March 25th, midnight of March 24th, March 25th, 1971.
Right.
On the basis of documents, let's say he could not prove, a Bengali Hindu family could not, and there are many out of that 22 million, 20 lakh odd families who have been left out now, who could not prove that they came before this date. They now get a chance, once this bill is passed, they now get a chance of saying that, arguing that they were a minority community in that country, in the country of their original country, and they have fled because of persecution, and now they should be given citizenship, provided they are minorities in that country, provided they are Hindus or Buddhists or apart from Muslim. Now that's one part. The second part, the second part of the politics is it's also linked to the West Bengal polls. West Bengal goes to polls in 2021, and this is going to be a very crucial issue, because NRC was also a very crucial issue, an emotional issue, an issue that created also fears that, because Mr. Sai mentioned about Tripura, and it's a fact. Lakhs and lakhs of people came from East Pakistan and settled in Tripura, where the indigenous people, Tripuri, the indigenous people were outnumbered by Bengalis, from Bengali Hindus from East Bengal, East Pakistan, and now Bangladesh. So this is the second part of it. The two are linked.
Right.
And I'm coming to your question to me that are these fears genuine? So I just told you about Tripura.
Right.
Tripura perhaps is one state that saw the largest number of exodus or people settling down post partition because of violence in East Pakistan, and then clearly the indigenous community who spoke a language called Kok Borok, which is gone now. They have been completely outnumbered, or Bengali Hindus numbers are more. One must understand that, and Mr. Sen can add to what my thoughts. All the communities that we are talking about in Northeast are actually in, sometimes they vary between 1,000 and lakhs.
Right.
Very, small population of tribals. And they have genuine fears.
Sure.
And we've seen ethnic violence. We have actually, if you go back to 1983 and what happened in Delhi, that was a sort of ethnic cleansing.
Sure.
So, it's a very, very emotive, explosive issue. It needs to be handled with great care in the Northeast.
Okay. A couple of aspects there that I'd like to take forward since we are here, Sai Deepak. So, what happens to the Assam Accord, first and foremost?
Right.
Secondly, what about the rights of the indigenous people? Now, what's going to happen to them? Are we going to see some special provisions?
I think this is the most important question, and that is at the nub of this entire issue. So, India has to undertake a balancing act here. One is some of the constitutional promises made to the states of the Northeast with respect to protection of their indigenous identity. That is something that you have to take into account. And you're also trying to balance your civilizational duties to people who are being persecuted in the neighborhood. Okay? Let's take it for granted that because there is a government which is at the heart of this particular exercise, there is a political incentive. Okay? Let's not discount that at all. I am taking for granted that there is a political incentive and perhaps a certain vote bank is being catered to. However, dehors that, the question has to be tested on merits. Okay? Which is, do the people who are being persecuted in our neighborhood have a right to expect some kind of a relief from India, for the simple reason that the policy which is behind their persecution continues to be the policy behind the partition of this particular country in 1947, right? In which case, it is the continuing effect. In legal language, that is a recurring cause of action. Okay, that's one. Two, if you look at the history of how Tripura has handled this particular issue, they have had legitimate fears. Whether it's a Bengali Hindu or a Bengali Muslim, they have a problem with the fact that a Bengali enters that particular state because they were worried that their indigenous identity would be lost in that particular deluge, because the numbers were pouring in for multiple reasons. Now you have to strike a distinction between two different categories of illegal immigration. Both of them are illegal immigration unless and until they are given the status of a refugee. And literature says one particular group comes to India with a specific design for looking for better economic opportunities and also, let's say, as a continuum of an unfinished agenda, whereas the other group is running away from the particular place because the other place has become an inferno for persecution, religious persecution. Let's be blunt about it. Okay, so that is a distinction that you have to draw, which is why, since they could not enter Tripura, they started entering West Bengal and other parts of the country. Okay, so how do you address this particular issue? I think if the government of India is stepping into this particular picture, it has to take into account these legitimate concerns of the states of the Northeast and share the burden with other states who are in a better position to take them. So, for instance, if you look at Pakistani Hindu refugees that come from Pakistan, they are largely in Delhi and Rajasthan, and some portions, let's say, maybe in Haryana, not beyond that. Rajasthan has been welcoming them because they don't see a problem as far as their indigenous identity is concerned, because it's not the same as a tribal identity in the Northeast. So when you already have only hundreds to thousands in the Northeast, you obviously have a legitimate fear. So perhaps the government of India should ask for the help of other states which are in a better position to absorb this particular community. I do believe that the NRC and the Citizenship Amendment Bill not only go hand in hand by design, I believe they must go hand in hand by design, for the simple reason that you want to exclude a population which you believe is an illegal immigrant, and you also want to provide for relief for those people who do not have any other place to go.
Okay.
These communities see India as their natural homeland, rightly so, and therefore they must come here.
Okay.
So I don't see a dichotomy in this particular position. Whatever may be the political incentive or design behind this particular thing, I do believe that it makes perfect sense to have both of these legislations go hand in hand.
Okay. Since we are here, Mr. Sen, since we are talking about numbers, since we are talking about dispersing them and spreading them across the country, what are the numbers? What kind of numbers are we looking at really? And can it really make a change in any of the states?
I'm not too sure about the numbers. I won't be able to hazard a guess, but I don't think it will be running into lakhs and more than that. It will be huge, I mean. So, and I don't know, really speaking, whether the other states would be in an accommodative state to welcome the refugees. I don't think, I don't really think. And I'll take an extreme example also, or rather that you say in Tamil Nadu, you have some Hindu Tamils coming in because of certain political repercussions, or may not be persecution directly, but indirectly some constraints and all that. Will Tamil Nadu themselves accept them? I have my doubts on that, because there are political repercussions, economic repercussions and all that. So, I mean, I won't be able to hazard a guess on what will the reaction, but generally the reaction may not be welcoming. It may be, I mean, there is opposition politically across the various states. The other thing is, I wonder whether this CAB was necessary, whether the Act of 1955 could not be tweaked or operated suitably. Not tweaked, I am saying operated with some administrative action within the scope, within the ambit of that Act, to take care of the issue, instead of enacting, formulating an act like this and then bringing the religious element into it. So these are issues on which I think it is. I mean, we could reconsider perhaps.
Okay. Okay. Like Sai Deepak pointed out, there's also a political message in all of this. Let's not forget that aspect and that angle too. Since we're talking about political messages, let's not forget, Sandeep, that this bill is likely to be taken up very soon, in the next few days. In fact,
yes.
What kind of a backlash or what kind of a mood can we see in Parliament when this bill is taken up?
Well, I think the very interesting, a very interesting point would be how the Congress party reacts. The Congress, on this issue, for example, the Congress itself is divided in Assam. In Assam, you have Brahmaputra Valley and Barak Valley. So, Barak Valley is predominantly Bengali-speaking population, and they welcome this because you have large number of people, large number of families who are actually without a proper status, so once they have this law and by which they apply and get proper status, they would welcome. And in fact, if I am not mistaken, at one point of time, the Tarun Gogoi government had mentioned, had passed a resolution in the Assam Assembly to take it up with the centre, then UPA, to accord status of citizens to these people who had come and settled down. These are Bengali Hindus and people from Bangladesh and East Pakistan who had settled down in Barak Valley. So you had one section of the party who were in favor of it, the other section saying that not at all, because they go back to the same theory that, for example, the distinguishing feature between India and Pakistan is that while Pakistan accepted, they went by religion being the criteria for citizenship, we accepted secularism or secular, the idea of a secular nationhood, where virtually anybody of any religious denomination could come and settle down. So that idea is being changed. Perhaps that is what Mr. Sen mentioned, that, if you want to, without changing the idea of the grand idea of the constitution, could you have tweaked the rules of how you apply citizenship to benefit certain communities who have been, after all, it's also a case of humanitarian rights of people who have been here for decades and decades and still being considered as stateless. Okay. So that aspect is also there. I mean, you cannot just wish away that lakhs of people are there without any status. Sure. They are virtually non-entities,
Okay. Yeah.
So that bit is there, but could we have done it in a way, not to challenge the very idea that only a particular community or a community of a particular following particular religion will be welcomed and others will be shunned? I think that is something that perhaps could be relooked.
Okay, we should have been more accommodative is what you're suggesting. All right, J. Sai Deepak, do respond to that. And also another question that I have, what does the constitution say?
That's exactly what I was coming to.
About all of this. Yeah.
So, in fact, I have to vociferously, vehemently and vigorously disagree with everything that was said in the last few minutes by both the panelists. One, if somebody is being targeted on the basis of religion, to actually say that let us actually turn a blind eye to the motivations behind that particular persecution is to insult that particular person who is already at the receiving end of the rough end of the stick. That's point number one. Point number two, assuming that you had actually made a change to the Citizenship Act en masse and then introduced a religious element into it, that would have been deeply problematic. However, if you have actually limited the scope of this particular exercise to 3 specific countries which have a specific religious identity by virtue of their constitutions, and there is a religious minority in that particular community that is being targeted because of its religion, which is precisely why you need an amendment which is specific to that particular area, so to speak, and therefore you are trying to address that particular audience. Had you actually undertaken changes on the basis of religion under the Citizenship Act, that would have been deeply problematic and that would have opened it up to a lot more constitutional challenges. Point number two, this argument of Article 14, which has been constantly touted and that's been used against this particular bill. Frankly speaking, then I think we have misunderstood the very concept of Articles 5 to 11 under the Constitution and what it actually stands for. Existing citizens and citizens under Articles 5 to 11 cannot be discriminated against on the basis of their religion in the eyes of the law. But vestation of citizenship is different from existing citizens, okay? Which means when somebody chooses to enter this particular country, you have a right to actually impose certain conditions. Assuming for a moment, I'm taking the worst case possible. If this particular bill had said, the Christians in Pakistan, when they enter this country, they have to embrace Hinduism and they have to convert to Hinduism, that would have been problematic. Instead, the bill says, you come as a Christian, but you happen to be a minority in that particular country and you're being targeted for the particular faith. In fact, you should take up the history of why Hindus converted to Christianity during the riots in 1947. Most of these people converted because they wanted help from other communities so that they could be protected as long as they were in Pakistan, because they couldn't leave that particular place. They've lived there for generations together. Okay, this is the history of it. Therefore, this argument of Article 14 coming in the way of the Citizenship Bill, I think, frankly speaking, that does not hold water at all. Any number of judgments clearly say that when it comes to vestation of the status of a refugee, and then when an outsider, so to speak, technically enters this country, the country has the right to apply its discretionary filters in terms of granting both the status of refugeeship as well as citizenship. That much I think I'm very, very clear about. 3, every country as a sovereign state, whether it's a civilizational state or a nation state, has the right to apply its security considerations before it applies the principles of non-refoulement. In fact, as part of the discussion, we should even ask, then what happens to Rohingyas? Right? That's a question that you have to ask. There is a security clearance which has already raised a red flag. Now, Bangladesh is saying that they're an internal security threat. All these days, when India was actually saying it, the dispensation, because it happens to be a certain dispensation, it was branded a fascist concern. It was branded a bigoted concern. Now, neighboring countries are also making the same statement, so to speak. And effectively, Bangladesh is an Islamic republic. They have a problem with Rohingyas. So, I think we need to be very clear about the facts. We can get wishy-washy and muddle everything. However, let's speak. What are the facts? What is the constitutional issue? Facts are that the scope of this particular bill is limited to 3 countries which have a specific Islamic character.
Okay.
Right? Point number 2, therefore, when they choose to enter this particular country, you're applying a certain filter of persecution on the basis of religion. You cannot take away that aspect from the calculus altogether, because if you do so, you're not allowing the person who is suffering that particular persecution to tell you the cause of that particular persecution.
Right.
I don't think that should be allowed.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Sen, close the show for us, with your concluding remarks on the best way forward, really, as far as all of this is concerned, because let's not forget, the last time around we were here, there was a lot of backlash. How do we circumvent that?
You see, first I just wanted to add, in fact, Mr. Deepak had actually seconded what I said, that each state has its right to apply the filters when you accord citizenship. So that could have been done within the existing institution. What I mean, rather than going in for the additional institution. I said, now your point was, what is the scenario for the future? You see, political consensus has eluded the government. So that is one point. So impact of that has to be felt, will be there. And then the second point is on our relations with the other countries, particularly with Bangladesh. You see, I'm putting Pakistan aside. Bangladesh relations are different because the regime there is, accommodative to other communities and all that. How do they feel? How do they view this? So on that, I have my, question marks are there. And I feel that, there may not be too many people trying to take or using recourse to this particular bill if it is enacted and found not accepted in the eyes of law. So these are the issues which are looming. I can't say for certainty how things would pan out for the future. So basically, I would put it that way.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.